Welcome back to the flip side, ladies and gentlemen. Galen Clavio here, along with Brian Moritz. There he is. You see him, that beautiful, beautiful visage there with the cat plates and the moose plate behind him.
We have a moose, a raccoon. No, I don't know. A badger? Sure. A cat and a reindeer dressed in winter.
Life's an incredible thing. It really is. Anyway, we're back. We're here to talk a little bit of everything today. A lot of stuff going on. I did not dress up today. I had a lot of stuff happening out there in the wild blue yonder. I got the cops called on me earlier today.
What'd you do?
So this is silly. So we have a golden retriever, which many of you on the show have seen, named Nelson. And our obedience trainer suggested that we go downtown in Bloomington and walk around. And so I was like, yeah, sounds great. So we went down there, and we one of the things that he likes to do is take the dog up an elevator. It's the first time for Nelson on an elevator. So we went up an elevator in the parking garage downtown. So it's not a big parking garage. It's like 4 stories. So we start walking down the ramp, and one of the things that is good for the dog to do is to walk behind cars and around cars so that they don't get like paranoid about being in tight spaces, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So we did that, and he did great. Nelson did an awesome job. And so we walk out of the parking garage, and we walk about 3 or 4 blocks, and then a uniformed Bloomington Police Department officer pulls up his car right beside us, gets out, and says that he'd gotten some reports of some people looking in cars in the parking garage, and apparently it matched our description.
Nice.
Which was great because like I'm in what I'm in now, and the trainer's in a bright lime green shirt. And, I know that the city's not what it used to be, but the idea that you would, in those sorts of clothes, be looking into cars and trying to steal stuff, I thought was a little bit humorous, particularly when you're like towing an ornery golden retriever with you. So
right. Because as you know from your years as with a life of crime, if you want to commit crime, you want to be as conspicuous as possible. You want to have as many things calling attention to you as possible before you actually commit the crime. It's
the Donald Trump Jr. way. So
boy, he's an idiot. I mean,
he's either an idiot or he's making an assumption that by having all the information out there, the media cycle will eat itself. I think the problem that he's got is he thinks that the media is who's going to like potentially charge him with a crime, as opposed to the special prosecutor.
Right.
So there's a bit of an issue there, I think. But yeah, man, that was a hell of a thing to watch unfold yesterday. Like the shock on the faces, or the Twitter, I guess not the faces, but the shock in the Twitter accounts of some of the journalists that had been covering that case was palpable.
I forget the reporter for I think it was either the Times or the Journal whose tweeted response was literally something like, I've been chasing this story for a year, and he just tweeted it out. Yeah. Like you could sense that.
He also had a statement like, I guess none of us just thought to ask Donald Trump Jr. to put himself in that situation. I mean, it's true. No one said, "Hey, can you just release the tweets?" Maybe that's the tack that needs to be taken.
Hey, can you forward me the emails? And he'd be like, "Yeah, sure, I've got them." It's that weird kind of. I'm not gonna let. And it's what's weird about so many things that are weird about it, but like, taking politics out of it from like a damage control spin PR perspective, like. I guess part of it is I'm being transparent and I'm getting out in front of the story. But it just seems weird that like when your entire like PR move as a White House is basically to condemn most mainstream well-respected media outlets as fake news. The New York Times, if they had reported this like they were, because I guess from my understanding is the story, he released them because the Times said, we've got the emails, can you comment on it like you're due? And he's like, aha, I'll beat you to it.
Right.
Which makes no damn sense. But like, you think that, for fake news, they would just be like, New York Times has a story, or more fake news from they made this up, they blah blah blah, created it, whatever. I don't know. It's just
it's yet another odd like subplot with this whole thing that I think is just really the whole thing's been fascinating because it's like so much of the process of the story and the kind of the eddies that the story has followed have defied the norm, I guess. But on the flip side, it's like, do we have a norm for this sort of an era? I mean, yeah, I know Obama was like the first social media president, but the social media Obama came in with, the way that they worked was much different in
Right.
2008, even in 2012, than what we've got in 2017. And so, when you look at it, you're like, maybe this is the new normal. I mean, why not?
Yeah, I don't. It's bizarre to me to watch this and to kind of understand why he would do it, the process behind it, just and trying to catch up on that story yesterday was crazy. Like it was really one of those days where you had to stop following for a little bit and let kind of the story settle and people to actually write about it or come up with like an actual story about it, because trying to follow it in real time was just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And so I put this out here. We were talking a little about this on Twitter just before we hit record. I put this out there, thinking politically. Like I maybe took one political science class in my undergrad days, so I am not a political theorist.
I took 2, so I am a political theorist.
You are okay. As a political science expert, you can help me out on this. So my question is, from a purely political standpoint, from a popular support idea, what is the incentive for the Paul Ryans, and I'll say Paul Ryan, but you can insert Mitch McConnell or whatever Republican leadership, to still support Trump? Because here's the thing, I retweeted this out. And somebody had said, it's amazing there's not one Republican who wants to be remembered as the greatest American ever. The first Republican to actively, not just, well, this doesn't look very good, John McCain style poo-pooing, but like actually come out and condemn Trump and say that, whatever, he should be impeached, whatever, wherever you go with it. And I was just thinking, like, if you're Paul Ryan, why stick with this guy? You've got Mike Pence waiting in the wing, who is doing a beautiful job of staying away from of throwing everyone else under the bus while he just kind of stands off to the side. He's as much a conservative ideologue as Ryan and McConnell are. He's more conservative, kind of traditionally minded than Trump has ever been. So it's not like if Trump gets impeached or resigned that like Hillary wins because she was runner up. That's not how it works. Well, so I guess I wonder, from a political standpoint, why stick with this guy at this point? Why not cut bait, say he betrayed us, he betrayed you. We want to restore. We want to, even if you put the whole GOP puts party before country, why not say we need to save the party for this and future generations and not be taken down by George and George Michael Bluth?
Okay, so I'm going to try to respond to this. And I think the problem with trying to respond to this is that people assume when you lay out a plan of action that you approve of that plan of action, or you think that it's the right plan of action. Like one of the hallmarks of the social media era is that we've removed any sort of like third-party objectivity or context from people's statements. And so I'll preface what I'm about to say with that. So. Okay. Here's what I think. I think the reason Ryan or some of the other people in the congressional leadership, McConnell, whoever, haven't done what you've described is really probably twofold, maybe threefold. So I think the number one thing is the people that are calling for that kind of action are almost uniformly anti-Trump, very liberal, progressive, whatever you want to label them, people
like me,
who are, people like you. I mean, not just you. I mean, but very much the political class, the people that are very attuned to what's going on, the people that are following the Hill on Twitter, the people that are like reading the New York Times religiously every day. That is such a minuscule segment of the overall population. I think that for a lot of the people, there's been a lot of complaints about the kind of inside the Beltway, outside the Beltway thing. Like I don't know if you read that book about the Hillary Clinton campaign yet, or one of the things that comes out in that, and I thought Matt Taibbi like brought it up really well in the review that he wrote about it, was this idea that there's such a disconnect between the people who, not just the inside the Beltway people, but the people that have connected themselves to the information sources inside the Beltway, and the people who don't pay that much attention to it. You know, it's kind of like the difference, to use a sports analogy, it's like the people who are like hardcore sabermetric baseball types and the people who tuned into the All-Star game because they thought it would be fun. Like, and I think there's far more people in the voting public who look at it in the latter perspective, and so they're not necessarily going to give Paul Ryan the benefit of any doubt, or any sort of, like, you know, extra plaudits for turning on Trump, because they haven't followed the story closely enough to realize that that might be a good thing to do. The inside the Beltway people say that they will, but, you know, as we've seen many times, the approval of the people on the inside the Beltway thing is a very fickle sort of deal. Like, you know, it doesn't last very long. And for someone like Paul Ryan, who's not running for president, he's already Speaker of the House, like, there's not a lot else that he needs, except maybe, I guess, if he wants to run for Senate. Like, that crowd isn't going to do him any favors anyway down the line. Like, the only reason they're even saying that is because there's a larger objective that the people that are being critical want to have taken out of the way, which is Trump. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you know, the disarray that the Republicans were in post Watergate gets kind of overshadowed now. But that was a party that was in tremendous disarray for about 4 or 5 years. I mean, to the point that, you know, you had faithless electors in 1976. You had Jimmy Carter, who under normal circumstances probably wouldn't have had a shot in hell at being elected to the presidency, got elected largely because people were so fed up with the Republicans. Regardless of what the Republicans as a party do with their reaction towards Trump, there is going to be a negative reaction towards the Republicans if they move against Trump, and it'll come from both sides. Democrats will immediately use that as a bludgeon against them in the primaries and in the general election, saying, look, these people nominated someone that got impeached. And right. The Trump voters will say, these assholes betrayed a Republican-elected president. So, like, it seems like, oh, no, they'll be heroes. No, they will be drummed out of public office. And maybe that's the right thing to do, but the political calculus just isn't there. So that would be, I know that's not what people want to hear, but if you're really going to look at it from a political perspective, you have to look at it from their political perspective, not the political perspective of the people that just want Trump out, which granted is a lot of people.
Right. No, that's a really, really good point. I mean, any Republican who does this, while they may be like remembered and thought highly by like people like me, they're done. Are you going
to vote for him? Are you voting for Paul Ryan in the general?
Of course not. He's in Wisconsin.
Well, no, I mean, like, if he did this and then used it as a platform to run for president, would you vote for him against a Democrat? No, of course not. So what good does it do him?
That's good. No, it is. It's a good point. You're signing your own death warrant, really, if you're a Republican and you do that, because you're angering the Trump base is tiny, and I often feel like the Republicans feel like they are very scared of this very relatively small Trump base. It's like 20-25%, which is not big. And let's face it, he won the primary, but he won really a crowded field. So there were a lot of slices to that pie until the very end. But there were a lot of slices of that pie, and so he was kind of winging it. So I feel like they're very scared of that very kind of like vocal wing, and you wonder too how much what they saw happen with the Tea Party in 2010, where like that really vocal band, small but really vocal band, really kind of took over the party, and it's just, like I've said before, and I'm sure on the show, this is all fascinating to watch. If it didn't all mean we're gonna die somehow. But no, this watching the story unfold is fascinating. And now, you always, it's funny to see like the defense being, well, it's not really collusion because they only met once, or it's not actually treason because blank. Because of course, let's be honest, this was probably the only meeting they had. They met once and it didn't go anywhere. And shucks, let's go back to New York City. But it's fascinating to watch, and it's much better to talk about than, as my overlay would suggest, David Brooks taking a friend to a deli and her being confused about meat.
that story again. It's funny that story blew up. It only really blew up on Twitter. Like I noticed it was among the same sorts of people that we're talking about that think that Paul Ryan should throw Donald Trump under the bus. It's like I saw all of the tweet. I still haven't read the piece, to be honest with you, because the responses to it made me uninterested.
Right, me too.
Like, oh, wow, David Brooks wrote something dumb again. Wow, let me rush over to that and write 1,000 words on Medium. It's like there is something that's interesting though. So two things that I think, since we're talking politics, we might as well talk some more politics. Did you read the Paste piece on lecture porn yet?
No, but now I'm interested.
Okay,
hang on. This is gonna be fun. This is always fun to Google something like this. Magazine lecture porn.
This was retrieved from Matt Zimmerman's Facebook page.
So I'm assuming this is audience members are vomiting, fainting, getting got cut off. Getting in. No, this is 1984. No. Hang on.
This is by an author named Emmett Penny. This is great radio, by the way, that we're doing here.
Emmett Penny. The title is better now that we're videoing it.
The title is Lecture Porn: The Vulgar Art of Liberal Narcissism. But the kind of the core concept of this is, and it's Paste. Paste is a very it's a little out there in terms of their political perspective. I think that they've got some unique stuff. It's kind of like if Vice Sports had a political thing going. But one of the things they talk about, I'll just quote it here. What is lecture porn? It is the media spectacle of a lecture whose audience is the opponent of the lecture's intended target. Jon Stewart, Trevor Noah, Samantha Bee, Keith Olbermann, Rachel Maddow, Aaron Sorkin, and a whole host of others have built their careers on this form. Lecture porn pulls off an amazing trick. It simultaneously delivers both elements of narcissistic supply. You sit and watch someone ingratiate themselves to you while they eviscerate someone you don't like, who is, in turn, unlikely to watch said lecture. It's an interesting piece. From a political discourse perspective, you can argue the finer points of whether it's a huge problem or not in terms of one political party over another. But the argument is that it hurts liberals and progressives because it castigates people that they don't agree with as just being wrong and irredeemable, as opposed to conservatives who just cast the people they don't agree with as wrong and something else, but not irredeemable. It doesn't write them off the ticket entirely. And when you talk about the small, the minuscule Trump minority, it's still, what would you say, 25% of the voting electorate right now?
About that, yeah.
I mean, that's from a percentage perspective, that's small. From that's a huge block. That's a larger block than the entire African American voting block combined with the entire Asian American voting block. It's a tremendous amount of votes when you take the whole thing into account. And this article is fascinating, I think, because it talks about why is it that Democrats have lost all these special elections, to terrible people. You had the Montana congressman who body slams the Guardian reporter. You've got, other people who have, had significant moral and ethical lapses who keep getting elected over Democrats. And it's why do people hate Democrats so much? And so this again goes back to this idea of why Ryan and the rest of the Republicans don't want to throw Trump overboard, because they think, okay, well, we can manage Trump. We'd prefer to deal with Pence. We can manage Trump, but we have a built-in advantage in the electorate right now, which is that none of us are Democrats. And why tip that balance if we think we can manage the situation on our own here?
Yeah, I finally found the article, and I remember seeing Matt post it, and it is true. I remember hearing, I think on a podcast, I think it might have been Dubai Friday, which is a great podcast I can recommend, that it was about one of John Oliver's big takedowns of Trump. And I remember the hosts were kind of joking about it. And they were making a lot of the same points that this article is seemingly making. It's basically the liberal version of Fox News, right? Kind of preaching to the choir. The other side sucks and is terrible, and we're smart and right and doing all that. But what kind of ruined John Oliver for me was the idea, realizing that all the things he so awesomely takes down, and he's brilliant at it. I still use the net neutrality thing in my classes at least once a semester. It's brilliant. But he only takes down, he really goes after kind of low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
You know, like he goes after like net neutrality. Okay, that's a really easy thing to take down. The NCAA. Whoa, that's a challenge to go after the NCAA.
We have something here called IUSA, which is the IU Student Association, and they like, you know, they're the ones that they have tickets. They run for like student office, and this reminds me, I think it was 1998 or 1999. Some of my IU people will remember this. There was a joke ticket that was started called the Vast Right-Wing Conspiracy. And their whole thing was like they were mocking the process. And so they had this big press conference in Dunn Meadow, and they were going to announce their platform. And so they came out and they announced that their platform was that they were against hate. and it's the same sort of thing you're talking about with John Oliver. It's like, okay, great. Yeah, go after net neutrality. That's you're really stepping out on a ledge there, buddy.
Right.
I mean, yeah. So
we have some great topics from listeners that we collected on Facebook and Twitter this morning. You said did you have any other kind of thinking points that you wanted to hit before we get rolling here?
One, before
we start the show, actually.
Okay, yeah, we actually start the show. Did you read the much talked about piece in the New Yorker, the climate doom piece yet?
I started reading it, I think on Monday morning, and I realized that it would leave me depressed and angry for the whole week. So I stopped. So I know the basics. Basically, we're all going to die like in 3 days.
Well, not quite in 3 days, but yeah. Well, it's interesting though, because that I've seen that posted quite a bit. And then I've seen a lot of reaction to it, even from like very like active, people that are very active politically in terms of trying to fight climate change, saying, this is really overstating a lot of facts. It's overstating a lot of the things that scientists themselves are saying. It's being kind of aggressively pessimistic. And I think I saw, since porn seems to be the word du jour with a lot of this stuff, I think someone even referred to it as disaster porn. And it is an interesting phenomenon, I think, because I mean, this is becoming more and more in the public consciousness, and I think that certainly the scientific evidence is overwhelming. But what's fascinating is this idea that there's a segment of, and I noticed this with journalists especially, there's a segment of journalists who seem to write from a perspective of it's almost like a morality play. Like all of these things are going to happen, and we deserve it. And that's like that ends up being the centrifugal point of the piece, as opposed to laying out exactly what it is that's being faced. It's a subtle thing, but it's something that's interesting because it's very judgmental in a way that I think is fascinating, because it presupposes a kind of a top-down control level that probably 98% of the audience doesn't actually possess. And I don't know, what's your opinion on that sort of an approach to writing about a subject like that?
I mean, I get it I guess I get it from the perspective, especially when you're talking about something like climate change or something like that, where it's kind of no, this is important. We need to do something about this. We need to do something about this 20 years ago.
That's not quite what I'm talking about.
No, I know. But it's kind of, I think that's kind of like a baseline of it. Like as trying to, like I said, I haven't read the article, so I'm struggling to kind of think of the tone that you're talking about. But I don't know. It just strikes me as, this idea of almost journalist or writer as activist, or like not just we're reporting what's happening, like putting some what's the word I'm looking for? Putting some real urgency to it. And it's very easy. And it's interesting that you mentioned this about climate change, because I think, I jokingly retweeted, but there's some seriousness. Charlie Daniels, the Devil Went Down to Georgia guy, who incidentally has the worst body odor of any human being I've ever been near. But yeah, he tweeted out something along the lines of, the universe's thermostat is controlled not in heaven, not at the United Nations. God controls the thermostat. Like something like basically this idea that I've seen Republican politicians say before, that God is in charge of the climate, not man. And so I think the way you're talking about writers doing that is an interesting way to kind of recast kind of like the we've got to fight climate change side as a morality play when it's traditionally the other way. I don't know. It just
I want you to read the piece and then read some of the reaction pieces, and let's talk about it next week because I don't think it's not going away anytime soon.
No. Unless we solve climate change while I'm on vacation, I solve climate change, which could happen.
We'll get on that right now. So anyway, we have reader questions. What do we got going today?
All right, so we're gonna start with we'll start with the one that was posed to you, and then we'll do you, me, and then we'll go around. So this was John K. Colluder. Well, what is collusion anyway? What is colluder anyway? He's asked, my cousin recently adopted a dog and named it Fagin. Should he have named it Becker instead?
Yeah, I love that.
Okay.
Did you get it?
No, I don't. Is this the TV show Becker?
No.
Okay, is this the tennis player Becker? Because all my expertise here is the tennis player Boris Becker and Fagin's the bar by Syracuse.
Well,
and
both
Kate
of those,
and Kate Fagin, the lovely and talented writer for ESPN and Hot Takedown host.
You've managed to miss both the best Fagin and both the best Becker. It's kind of sad. But no, this is a Steely Dan reference, actually.
Oh, okay. That's another topic we have to get to. Thank you for reminding me of that. Okay.
Donald Fagen, the lead singer, and Walter Becker, who's the bassist / electric guitarist, they were the writing team that comprised Steely Dan. They met at Bard College in the late 60s and then went and wrote at the Brill Building for a while and then became international superstars. So my response to him was simply the more sarcastic the dog is and the more biting the dog's commentary on life, the more likely it needed to be named Becker instead of Fagin. Fagin's a little more optimistic, although when you hear him sing, you wouldn't necessarily think so. But I'm surprised that you're not more into Steely Dan. Like that's like from a lyrical perspective, that is absolutely a writer's sort of band, you know?
Yeah. So this brings up another topic that came up on a Facebook discussion that we had we were have a thread that you or my wife were on. My wife as a topic brought up her musical gaps, the gaps in her musical knowledge. So the backstory of this is the joke in our house is that my wife killed Levon Helm. So this was 7 years ago. My wife was pregnant with our daughter, and Levon Helm and Willie Nelson, they were on tour, and they came and played in Canandaigua at the CMAC Amphitheater, which is a great venue. And we went with my in-laws, and we were going primarily to see Willie Nelson. I'm a longtime big Willie Nelson fan. My in-laws are huge, old kind of outlaw, old school country music fans. My wife grew up with that. I grew up with that music. And Levon Helm was there too. And at the time, like, I knew who Levon Helm was. I was never a very big fan of the band. Like, I appreciate them. I know one of those bands that kind of like Steely Dan, I guess. Like, I'm not particularly a fan of, but I'm not going to sit here and say, they're terrible, blah, blah, blah. Just one of the many bands I just didn't listen to a lot. And so we sit down, and there was confusion. There was expectations were not right. Expectations were that Levon Helm and his band were opening for Willie Nelson. And so we expected kind of like the usual opener, like half hour, 45 minutes. I still don't get
how you could have possibly expected that. But anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, and so Levon Helm starts playing, and he keeps going. He plays they play a full set. As you realize, wait, Levon Helm's going to play a full set. Of course he's going to. And my in-laws and my wife were less than happy. It was very hot. My wife was at the time 6 months pregnant or so. So it was a very hot, muggy night, and she started getting more and more ornery and more upset. And the joke is, at one time she's like, "I wish he'd die already," or something like that. I don't think she actually said that, but that was definitely her mentality of that. Maybe a year later, Levon Helm famously gets cancer and dies. So the joke in the family is that we killed Levon Helm. The point, circling to the bigger point, is that my wife, God bless her, has shocking gaps in pop music history and classic rock. So like one of the jokes we have is, there any classic rock will come on now, and I'll say, hey, this is the Rolling Stones. It could be Led Zeppelin. It could be Iron Maiden. It could be Levon Helm and the band. It could be anybody. one of the funniest moments is we were driving in the car one time, and Satisfaction comes on the radio, like the actual
Yeah, the
Stone
actual song. Yeah,
Satisfaction.
yeah.
Right. And I'm like, who is this? I'm quizzing her. She's like, come on, this is the Rolling Stones. I'm like, wow, I'll be surprised. I'm surprised you knew that one. Her response, I only knew it because Britney Spears covered this song.
Yeah.
But it is just like that kind of, you know.
I mean, to be fair, my wife has similar gaps.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. I mean, now she's gotten a lot better. Like,
right.
I remember playing like the Flying Burrito Brothers for the first time, and she had no clue. Now she knows the whole album by heart, mostly because I just play it incessantly. But, I mean, yeah, it's weird. Like the number of gaps that exist, and like I don't know what I mean, I have some theories as to why some people have them and some people don't. But
well, I'd love to hear them. I'd love to hear your theories as well. I mean, I think what's important to know when we say about gap, it's not just like, well, I don't know a lot of Led Zeppelin or I don't know Stones. Like she could hear a Led Zeppelin song and have to really like not Stairway to Heaven, but like, I don't know, Rock and Roll or Whole Lot of Love or Cashmere, and be like, who's this? Is this this sounds like and so those kind of gaps. And look, nobody has perfect musical knowledge, but that's just a funny one that it's just like an absolute black hole of nothing. So what are the theories that you have on this?
Well, I just think it's a value proposition. I mean, when did you learn about the majority of the classic rock bands? Like what time period in your life?
Probably college.
Okay. So I think for most people, it starts maybe as early as middle school. Depends on the people that you're around. But I think you have to have friends that are interested. I think you really have to have parents that listen to that music. And then you yourself have to seek some of it out. I mean, from middle school through high school, I think maybe into college, like that's when you learn about the most music that you're going to learn about. For a lot of people, it's just not that important. I have a former student of mine who, I mean, loves a bunch of different things, sports and movies and so forth, doesn't really listen to music, has never really listened to music. And so it's just never been that big of a thing for them. For me, it's always been a huge thing. And it was kind of a thing I did on my own for a long time where, I'd read about a band and I'd listen to the band and I'd want to listen to more. And then that would lead me to other people. And then you'd hear about other bands from that. I just don't think that that's that normal of a sociological process that people go through. There really have to be cues around you. And I think that especially in the culture we have today, I mean, I'm assuming your wife's about the same age that you and I are.
Yep.
It was probably easier back then because music was more pervasive within society. What we see now is music has become very kind of isolated, almost the way that movies have become isolated, and the music's probably more isolated than movies, particularly old music, because you don't have to listen to the classic rock station. You don't have to listen to the top 40 station. You can, if you are going to listen to music, you can find whatever. But if you're in your car, you might as well be listening to an audiobook as opposed to the radio. So a lot of the avenues through which music would have filtered into people aren't there. And I'm just guessing that your wife historically was around people that didn't care that much about music.
Well, they cared about specific music. Like it was very much country music, like that kind of 90s country music, like Garth Brooks, Trisha Yearwood, that kind of, and it's interesting because, and also kind of a time and space of where we grew up. Like you're saying, music is being really individualized now, and also individualized, not just in taste, but in terms of we can all listen to our own devices and our own things. It was it wasn't harder. It was a little harder to do that back then. And if you were in a house where, you're like my wife did, where her mom listened to primarily that kind of country music, and that's the music that was on. It was that was more dominant, I think, within a household than it would be now, where I can listen to one thing, she can listen to something else, my daughter can listen to. We can kind of each have our own, not just accounts, but like listen to our own things with a lot more ease than we did back then, and it's more culturally, I guess, acceptable to kind of do that, right? Like it's much more, your music is very much your individual playlist and your taste now, rather than kind of the big, kind of it's cultural musical lodestones.
I just don't think it's important culturally anymore. I mean, if you think about it, like, I mean, it's important from an ancillary perspective, but I don't feel like there's not a lot to hang on to. If you're a music person these days, you have to really go and find it on your own. And the fact of the matter is, that's not. I mean, I look at it like this: music was one of the few sort of cultural touchstones that everybody could connect to anywhere in the world, really. You know, I mean, you could go to, you know, I mean, the Rolling Stones or the Beatles could go to Indonesia and to play a show, and there'd be 50,000 screaming fans there because they'd heard the music, even if they didn't understand the language that it was in. You don't really have to have that now because social media has taken care of a lot of those connections for you, and there are a lot more. Like, it takes bands 2 or 3 years to put an album out now. You know, like television shows, you know, they're releasing entire seasons worth of shows instantly, you know. So like there's a lot more immediate cultural touchstones. And I think to some degree it's the problem with the music industry, because the music industry is still acting like it's 1975 in terms of the way stuff gets recorded, the way stuff gets marketed. So I do think that there's a problem with it there. But I think we're in a lull right now. And I think if you listen to music podcasts, a lot of them talk about how rock and roll is dead. And I mean, it's true. I mean, right now the music scene is almost entirely dominated by pop or by, you know, hip hop or by country. And like, those are the three things. And like traditional, like guitar based rock and roll isn't really a big deal to most people. It's still a big deal to some small groups of people, just like Western music used to be a big deal to people like back in the 50s. It wasn't a mass marketed thing. I think that'll swing around eventually, but it's going to take a wholesale change in the way that the industry goes about things. And I think as far as people having big gaps in their music, I think that's just only going to get worse. And, you know, and I think it's the same thing with movies. Like, I've got another former student of mine who works in TV. She was doing a radio show this weekend, and they made a list of all the movies she hasn't seen. Now, she's probably 26, 27. So she's never seen, I've got the list here because she posted it on Twitter. She's never seen, like, let's see, Field of Dreams, Groundhog Day, Airplane, Fight Club, Ghostbusters, the Goonies, Christmas Story, Friday, The Usual Suspects, Rudy, Major League 1 and 2, Happy Gilmore, Billy Madison, League of Their Own, Ace Ventura, Revenge of the Nerds. How many of those have you seen?
All of them, I'm sure.
And so, like, and that's that sort of thing, I think, that's something we've been seeing, you know, time and time again. It's like movies have always been a lot more like culturally kind of segregated based upon the generations that they pop up in. And maybe that's just how music's going to be. Whether this is really the third music generation, like, you know, the baby boomers were the first, Gen X was the second, millennials are the third. Maybe we shouldn't be expecting millennials or even the tail end of Gen X to really have that big of a concept of what was popular among the boomers.
So do you have any pop culture gaps?
Movies and TV from about 2004 on.
That's
because when I started, I've told this people before, like, I used to love watching movies. My original career goal was I wanted to be a film director. When I started like really hardcore broadcasting full time, I just didn't have time I had to cut something out. And so I've kept up on music. Like, I'm pretty up on what's going on in the music scene over the last 15 years. But, you know, like, I know of TV series that have gone on, and I've maybe watched parts of one or two of them. Like, I watched episodes of The Office, you know, and there've been a couple of others like that. But like, I'm on episode 2 of Game of Thrones, you know, and I've made it through one season of House of Cards. So those are my big ones. Like, I was pretty up on most of those sorts of items in terms of like being able to be really conversant about it until about 04, 05. And then I lost it and I've had trouble getting it back. How about you?
Yeah, I would say mostly movies, like TV a little bit, but I've seen enough of, I feel like, the bigger ones. Like, I watched The Office when I was on Parks and Rec. So I'm conversant on that, but movies, you know, especially since we had our daughter, like, those really kind of fell off because the movies get harder and harder to go to. And I watch a lot of Minion type movies and a lot of Disney type movies since then. And yeah, that just kind of becomes, you know, the one, you know, like the popular type movies become kind of like the easier ones to kind of drop off. And I guess new music in a way, but I don't really kind of view that as a gap. You know, like, I know Drake is popular. I think he's terrible, but I know he's popular. I know Kendrick Lamar is popular. I know I think he's really good. You know, my opinion doesn't go beyond that, but I am at least like know that those are names of musicians that are popular among my students. So, all right. Speaking of musicians, this one I think is directed at me because it's about the Avett brothers. So, do you mind if I just take this one straight up and you can like drink some tea or whatever?
please go ahead.
Okay. So anyway, this is my friend Jason Smith, and this is a setup from a discussion that we had been having on Facebook. He wanted me to discuss why the Avett brothers should fire half the band and Rick Rubin and, quote, simplify things. Discuss in 60 seconds, please. So this is a running joke on among Avett Brothers fandom. So the band started out as a three-piece, the two brothers and the bass player. Has in the past, I don't know, 15 years that they've been a band, they've grown, they've added musicians. They've been recording the last couple albums with Rick Rubin, which is kind of when they've had their bigger commercial success. And this past week, they did a 3-show run at Red Rocks. They do it every summer, and somebody commented on one of the fan boards that they wish they would simplify things and go back to kind of like the old days. And I think it's just, it's tiresome because it comes up in fandom on the fan boards all the time. But it's kind of like that classic, small band that we loved when they were tiny and they played little gigs. Now all of a sudden gets popular and their sound changes and it's not what it was when I liked them in 2004. And man, I wish it could go back to what it was before then. And I don't know, I'm sure REM fans felt the same way when Out of Time came out in 1989 and that. And so, it's kind of like the life cycle of a band seen through, kind of over and over again, right? Like the small band gets big and the fans who love them back when they were small wish they were still small and they're not anymore. So you were looking out the window. Are the cops coming for you again?
They're back. Yes. I'm terrified right now. I might have to start podcasting from an undisclosed location.
Awesome. I'm amazed that you haven't. Okay. So friend of the show and official sister of me, Amy Moritz, wanted us to talk about the lack of a true off season for pro sports and the message of having to be, quote, always on it sends to kids. So this kind of idea that sports news is always going, whether it's free agency or like mini camps and developmental camps are happening for the NHL, and this kind of, there's no real downtime, there's no real off season. And interesting, I think it's an interesting thing to think about, extrapolating that out to kids and that how they kind of always have to be on and like not resting and always working. Any thoughts on that?
I think it's a great preparation for real life. I mean, it's funny because when we talk about, sports are always on and we've got these 12-month seasons now. And it's like, well, first of all, just because there's news doesn't mean that there's like everyday work necessarily going in other than like the physical training that you have to do at this point. I mean, if you're going to be competitive, I mean, I hate to say it, but the people seem, I'm not talking about your sister here necessarily, but a lot of people who criticize the 12-month calendar of sports, I don't think they realize like how much better the training has gotten and how much more physically
smarter
and more demanding the sports are because I was listening to there was a podcast with Bill Simmons and John McEnroe, which is actually pretty good. I was listening to that this morning on my run, and they were talking about how, McEnroe and that whole group, Connors and Becker and Lendl, whoever, they're in an era in the 70s and 80s where, you're in the middle of the US Open and you're going to Studio 54,
right.
The night before your semifinal and you're out till 3 a.m. and it's like, and even Jordan 20 some years ago, he's going out gambling all night and then he's, going and playing a game the next day. Well, it's much harder for people to do that now because everybody around you is on these very tightly controlled physical regimens. And it's not, I mean, I don't think it's something to be critical about. I think it's the natural evolution of the sports. And I mean, if you think about the way that business works, I mean, we criticize the atmosphere around, a lot of businesses for being all work all the time, and they're very difficult. But ultimately, that's where, if you want to make a lot of money, if you want to like increase in reputation, you're going to go and do those things, and you're going to put in ridiculous amounts of billable hours as an attorney, or you're going to be working 7 days a week as a professor writing stuff. Is it healthy? No, that's a different discussion altogether. Right. But as far as the message that it sends, I think the message that it sends to kids is probably, well, this is how society's ruling itself right now. It's not necessarily you must do this. This can't ever change. And I think it'll eventually change because I think eventually we'll figure out that yes, human beings do have break points, but I don't know that it's something that we can look at and definitively say, that it sends a bad message. Because I think if like I think a lot of kids are looking at their parents and getting the same messages reinforced in watching the way that their parents are working on a day-to-day basis.
No, that's a good point. And being my sister's official spokesman here, I can say that I'm sure she's going from the is it healthy perspective, which is, like you say, a very different discussion. I think the important discussion to have, I think you're seeing some pushback, in like startup and tech startup culture to the work 100 hours a week, happy bro, push yourself to the brink culture.
Get a second gig.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think it's necessary, I don't think it's necessarily a healthy thing, and that's a juxtaposition, it's not healthy, but you're right. You're seeing, parents work a lot. You're seeing, these kind of vestiges of, and yeah, it is the kind of that weird, do as we say, not as we do. We want our students to kind of, speaking of my students, like we want them to be healthy. We want them to take care of themselves, don't kill themselves, but they see what succeeds and they see kind of what's demanding for it. And I also think about it from a kind of, from a developmental standpoint for young athletes. I feel like, what a pro athlete has to do to maintain their level of physical fitness is very different than from what an 11-year-old should be doing for their physical fitness and for their skill development. And I wonder if that's, one of the mixed messages getting into. I mean, it's a deceptively simple question that kind of gets at a lot of big issues about like work-life balance, work culture, mental health, physical health. One of the interesting things you mentioned about players not going out as much anymore. And I think, I forget who wrote this for ESPN. It might have been Baxter Holmes, but I'm blanking on it. It was about the importance of sleep that athletes have. And It's interesting because it's one of like the kind of hidden sabermetric analytics points that is really kind of changing a lot of how what's happening with sports is like we think of analytics a lot with like stats on the field and like quantifying performance and like on-field performance and ranking players and all that. But what's really happening, one of the changes is how athletes are handling themselves. So they know, well, I have to sleep. I have to like hydrate and sleep before I go to bed. I can't go out like I can't go out between games because,
alcohol dehydrates me. I wouldn't have ever known. Yeah.
No, I know. Right. But that's, I feel like a really interesting and not developing, because I think it's very much here, but an ongoing development in analytics. It's not just how we rank players and how we pick players or make trades or draft them, but like how players take care of themselves and how much they, and like kind of you figuring out their how to be at peak physical condition. I think it's a really interesting area.
Yeah. And look, I think we're seeing this. We keep seeing the tech world trying to refigure itself out on a regular basis. And that's where a lot of these ideas are coming from. The stuff gets kind of trialed in the tech world, and then it ends up filtering down to to sports, because a lot of the tech world owns sports these days. But first it was this idea of, we're not going to dress up at the office, so we're going to work when we want, and we're going to work from home. And now it's like, no, we're going to all come in and we're going to work here. And it's like they haven't really decided what works best. It's one long experiment that just continues and continues. And look, I mean, the idea of having a limited, well, first of all, the idea of like playing sports for money is not that old of a concept. It dates back to, what, the mid 1860s or something like that, or 1850s. So as things continue to turn, as money continues to go into it, I mean, I don't think that there's a message necessarily for kids one way or the other, because like the kids from 10 years ago weren't looking at the sports world and saying, my God, you have to specialize in a sport and you have to work at it, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there's no off season. I mean, this no off season thing really in the NBA has only been around for about 2 years now, really ever since the DeAndre Jordan kidnapping. And and then the rest of the sports, I mean, the NFL, I haven't heard anything from the NFL for like a month and a half. It's been great. Yeah. So I just think I'm always hesitant to jump to a conclusion one way or the other about what message it's sending, because the message then changes very quickly. And I think that that's probably what happens as we move forward with sports here. We're just going to continue to see it change. because someone will come up with a better idea. I mean, when we talk about like the free market at work, this is really it in a positive way. Like ideas coming out, people generating ideas, people trying those ideas out. They may not work, and if they don't work, then they don't work. You know, the backlash to sports specialization, it's something that probably isn't going to work, but it's something that people feel like they have to try, and then we'll figure something else out as we move forward.
All right, so we have 2 questions from Lauren Smith. First one, right in our wheelhouse. What would you prefer, a tiny house or a mega deck? Why? Show your work. Double points for HGTV and DIY in the same question. I think she's giving herself double points there, which seems a little weird, but I'll allow it because we like Lauren. So, tiny house or mega deck? What's your preference?
I just like nothing about the tiny house makes a lick of sense. Like I mean, I understand there's been this movement towards minimalism in certain segments of you know, wealthy East Coast populations, and this is the product of running out of space in your own environment and feeling like living in a walk-in closet is a great deal at $1,600 a month. Like, I would invite those people to come out here to the Midwest or go out to the West, and there's lots of land, and there's lots of places to build things. I mean, there's nothing about a tiny house that's appealing to me. Now, the deck thing is actually not terribly appealing either. The problem with the mega deck is the amount of money that goes into maintenance on a mega deck. I have not a mega deck by any means. I have a deck. It's a you know, it overlooks the yard. The grill sits on it, and I hate staining the thing. I hate power washing the thing. It is, you know, the boards go bad and you have to get them replaced, and that's expensive. And to take that and to expand it, the surface area by like a factor of 10, right. Unless it's like made of some like super polymer material that doesn't ever need stained or replaced, like that I'd be down with. But right. The idea of just having like a mega wooden deck, I'm not only am I out on that, I'm buying stock in whatever the opposite of that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a non-mega deck. I have a tiny deck. And I hate, and I love and hate it. Like, I love having it, but I hate it's so way past the cleaning point, need for cleaning and staining this season that it's a wash at this point. I don't see the value in a mega deck. Like, I don't see the allure of having this ginormous thing. I would rather have a yard than a big deck. I like yards. I like the flexibility of yards. Decks always feel like they're really good in theory, but they're really good for like sitting. Okay, I can sit anywhere. I don't know. I actually am one of those pain in the ass people who love tiny houses and love like Airstream trailers. I would love to have one. I've always liked small houses, like small craftsman type houses. Our house is relatively small comparatively speaking. Like, it's completely impractical. It's completely like my stuff wouldn't fit in a tiny house. My dogs would be too big for a tiny house. It's the most impractical thing in the world, but I still want one. Like, and I don't know. There is that, you know, it's completely irrational. It's completely dumb. It's completely East Coast elitist, but whatever. I'm an East Coast elitist. I'll own it. There's something I always find very, what's the word I'm looking for? Aspirational, I guess, about like, you know, the simplifying, and you only have the stuff you need, and it's very small, and it's very, you know, not minimalism for like the kind of minimalistic porn you see on Tumblr where it's like a table with one plate or something like that, but like, you know, very there's a certain sort of functionalism that I like about it. And well, I don't know, I like, it's completely impractical, and I would vote in my real life, I vote for neither. But if Lauren's making me pick one, and she is, because she has tenure and I don't, I'm going tiny house.
Oh, man, I mean, I just think I like how much does a tiny house cost?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No, of course not. Why would I know that? I know how much my house costs. My house is tiny. I can tell you how much my house costs.
Well, okay. Let me put it to you this way. Like, you can buy. I'm looking at the tiny house cost. Okay, here we go. Tiny house cost breakdown.
I see. There's from tinyhousegiantjourney.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're talking about this one. cost $31,160. Okay, in comparison to a normal sized house, not a problem. Now I'm assuming you've got it on wheels, so you're going to need to buy a $55,000 V8 pickup truck, which gets 8 miles to the gallon, to tow this thing around. So you're already at a point where you'd probably be just as good as just buying a 1,200 square foot house. My thing is this: if you're young and you're in a, I don't know, maybe you're not in a relationship or in a relationship, but you're unattached otherwise, and you don't have a job that requires you to be in one spot, yeah, sure, knock yourself out if it's what you want. But if you have kids already,
oh, no chance.
There's no way in hell. I mean, even if the kids are like fine with living in the tiny house, like, are you going to have relations with your significant other at any point in the future? And if so, like, when and how is that going to happen? I mean, if you're sleeping above your kids and like there's like a plywood sheet separating the upper and lower bed areas, like that's not going to work.
No.
I mean, maybe I guess it worked in like one room houses in like the 1800s, but we've gone past that as a race. I think, like, as a human race, we have exceeded that. That's like this is my argument with my wife. My wife loves camping. I'm not a big camping guy, and my argument is,
we've evolved.
We struggled for millennia to have running water inside and electricity and all of these things that are the comforts of living in a home. And we're going to just throw all that away and go sleep on the ground and have bugs crawl over us and take a crap in a bucket. Because why? Because nature? No.
Yeah, I mean, you make a fair point. I mean, I don't seriously argue with that. I like camping. Again, camping to me is like tiny houses. I like it in theory, but in practice, I'm always looking for a fair field. Lauren's other question is, second topic: should LA get the 2024 or 2028 Olympics?
You go first on this one.
Oh, crap. Let's see. 2028, because it's 4 years later, and that's less I have to hear about it.
I like LA. I really do. I'm one of the few people that likes Los Angeles, that actually admits it, that isn't from there.
Okay.
I hope for LA's sake they get neither. I know they're going to have to get one or the other, but right. Like, is there a worse thing right now than hosting the Olympics? I mean, even if you're LA and you don't need to build anything new necessarily, they will, because they will, but they don't have to, and they've got infrastructure already. But it's like, what, like, just putting aside all of the tremendous inconveniences of having the Olympics in your city, you've also got the now issue of, hey, a major sporting event is a great opportunity for a terrorist threat. Like, you don't need the reputational hit that you could take from having something go wrong.
Right.
I'll say this. I think that, why do we need a host for the Olympics? Aren't we at a point where we could simply have events in the best possible locations for those events across the world and just televise it? And it's like, you could have a 24-hour sporting event and not have it in a particular city. You could have a city that was named like the ambassador city, the ambassador city, something like that. And you could have like some of the all the indoor events could be there. But why? Like, why? I don't understand. I get why, but like, from a practical perspective, let's change this up a little bit.
Well, and I forget where I heard this, but one of the ideas that's been floated is, why not rotate it among like the same 3 or 4 cities each? I don't know, have like a rotation. So it's like LA, Paris, I don't know, blah, blah, Russia, so Putin doesn't nuke us, and I don't know, somewhere in Southeast Asia. And you rotate it among those 4 cities instead of going to this brand new city every time, which just leads to the white elephants and all the construction boondoggles. And we know why we don't, because the IOC is looking for money and all the bribes and stuff. But yeah, if you're going for a pragmatic point, I think that's the way to go. But that's an interesting idea of, why do you have to, why not have it at the best pool in the world? And then I think you do it because they have the Olympic ideal of the world coming together in one place, and sportsmanship and the opening ceremonies, and yay, world sports. But yeah, it's an interesting, it at least, opens up for an interesting thought to doing it somewhere else. So doing it another way that's not so rife with corruption and stadiums that don't work.
I mean, UEFA, which is a tremendously corrupt organization, the European Soccer Union, I think they're changing it now so that the next Euro Cup is going to be in cities in different countries with a championship in one spot. So it's going to be like, London might host the final, but the semifinals will be in like Prague and Amsterdam, and the quarterfinals will be in like Barcelona and Milan and a couple of other places like that. Right. Why not? Like what? Yeah. This is, again, it kind of goes back to the music industry. It's not 1975 anymore. Let's just change things, like change with the times. Like quit being slaves to this old method of doing things.
All right, so we have one more question. Do we want to tackle it today? Can we tackle it quickly, or do we want to table the hot dog discussion?
I refuse. That's just such a dumb no. We're not. Okay. We're never doing that. Okay. That's where I put my foot down topically on this podcast.
Because I actually have a good answer that sums it up pretty quickly.
Go ahead.
Okay, so it's Joanna Hoibers. Actually, she's a very good friend. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. I'm gonna be on vacation with her next week. She asked
ask her how to pronounce her name first, then.
I will. Yeah, I will. Is a hot dog a sandwich? She did this because my wife. I tweeted that my wife and I, after like 87 years of this argument raging on the internet, finally had this discussion this week, and I actually got the best answer from my friend Mark McGuire, who's a newspaper guy in Albany, St. Bonaventure graduate, and he said it best. Because the crux of the debate is, according to the dictionary, a hot dog is indeed a sandwich. Like there's a post on Merriam-Webster.com that says definitionally it is a sandwich. He said a hot dog is a sandwich the way that a tomato is a fruit. It is, except that it isn't. End of discussion. And I think that's a really, really good way of looking at it.
You're going to actually make me talk about this, aren't you?
I don't make you do anything.
All right. Here's what I hate about this question and why it's so dumb, beyond the fact that people just, like everything else on the internet, just beat it into the ground.
Right.
Here's the biggest issue I have with it. People ask you, is a hot dog a hot dog a sandwich? No. A hot dog is a piece of meat. Like by itself. It's just a piece of meat. So no, it'd be like saying, is a steak a sandwich, or is a hamburger a sandwich? No, it's a piece of meat.
Or is
I mean, like, if you want to say, is a hot dog on a bun a sandwich, that's a different thing. But if I put a hot dog on two pieces of bread, is it a sandwich?
If I put a hot dog, well, more importantly, you can put a hot dog on a plate and you call it a hot dog.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like that. It's like that Mitch Hedberg piece, where he complains about, when, they call it corn on the cob. And then when you have like just corn, you call it corn, but that's wrong because it comes on the cob.
Right.
Like, really, we should be calling it corn off the cob, right? I mean, so it's that sort of thing where you've got the hot dog is just the piece of meat. It's like any other piece of meat that would go into a prospective sandwich. And what makes it a sandwich or not a sandwich is what you do with it after that. Gotcha. Now you could make the question of, okay, it's because it's a hot dog bun as a conjoined piece of bread. If you put it in that, is that a sandwich? Now, if you're going to ask that question, I will begrudgingly say, well, okay, we should have a debate about open-faced breads and whether those really count, because then that opens up a whole bunch of different
things. Lobster roll.
Yeah. But the whole hot dog a sandwich thing, it takes too many things for granted, and it's lazy debating.
All right. Well, we've solved that issue, and now we can never speak of it again.
Thank God.
All right.
All right. Well, hey, good stuff. Thanks to all of you for listening in, and Brian, thank you for being you. It's great that you're you, and I don't think the podcast would not have you on it if you weren't you. So keep on being you. We'll be back if you guys want to catch up with us. It's at FlipSide Pod or at BP Moritz, at Dr. GC. You can always hit us up during the week with questions, reactions. If you don't like what we've said, let us know. At least it lets us know that people pay attention to us a little bit. But leave comments on the YouTube channel. We've got a podcast feed on iTunes, which you'll probably be listening to it on that now. But if you want to check out the YouTube, just search FlipSide Podcast on YouTube. You'll find us there. Any final thoughts?
Nope. Looking forward to a week in Lake George in the Adirondacks, where I'm going to solve. Was I going to solve global warming? Was that what I was doing?
You're going to solve global warming, yes.
On it. Okay, I'll report back in 2 weeks with how I fixed it.
We'll see which of us comes up with the better solution.
Gotcha.
Anyway, for Brian, I'm Galen. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.